What if the most innocent thing in a child's room isn't a thing at all? What if it's a witness? A silent observer who has watched eras change from over its little master's shoulder. A toy entrusted with secrets becomes their keeper. But what if it doesn't just keep them, but remembers? And not only remembers, but judges. There are stories that don't scream, but whisper from the darkness of attics. Stories of dolls with button eyes, dressed in faded sailor suits. Dolls that are said to have outlived their owners. Not just outlived them, but saw them to their final journey. The name of one such doll has been passed down for over a century, and it's spoken with the same caution one uses when skirting past old, locked rooms. Because, as rumor has it, he's still listening. Hello everyone, this is Fernando, and I'm bringing you a new chapter in our series of urban legends. I must admit, I couldn't pass this story up the moment I learned about it, so I hope it makes an impression on you. I will definitely release the promised story about cryptids and monsters very soon, so stay tuned. It will most likely be out by Sunday, so my word still stands. However, as I've mentioned in another video, when I come across something this intriguing, I simply have to share it immediately, and that kind of material always jumps to the front of the line. In this case, we'll be talking about an urban legend that's over 100 years old. I had heard of it before, but never delved into the details. However, when I stumbled upon a website listing the 10 most terrifying urban legends, I realized that this one is probably the creepiest of them all. Moreover, it served as the inspiration for a movie, or rather, several films, depending on how you interpret the plot. We're talking about the urban legend known as Robert the Doll, whose image you're seeing now. Perhaps some of you have already heard of this particular legend. It's one of those stories that's passed down by word of mouth, spreading almost like a rumor. But most people, like me, have heard something about it, but never knew all the details. So, in this story, I'll be able to present you with the full picture. Enjoy. In my opinion, this is one of the most interesting and fascinating urban legends I've ever come across. You're in for a real treat. So, it all began over 100 years ago. The first documented encounter with this doll, if you can call it that, occurred in 1906. So it's not exactly ancient history. We're not talking about something centuries old, but it was still quite a long time ago. In 1906, the doll was given to a family by their bohemian servant. Apparently, although she worked for the family, she had no love for them whatsoever. Perhaps she was mistreated. Perhaps she felt she wasn't treated well enough. Whatever was going through her mind, she wanted to do something, let's say, special for them. And this servant was allegedly well versed in voodoo and the dark arts, black magic, and things of that nature. So she decided she would definitely make them remember her, or at least do something to them that would repay them for the pain they must have caused her. And she presented this doll not to the husband, not to the wife, but to their son. The boy's name, apparently, was Robert Eugene Otto. This is actually where the doll's name, Robert, comes from, as the boy named it after himself. What's interesting, however, is that the boy himself, whose full name again was Robert Eugene Otto, preferred to be called Eugene, which is quite common. Many people go by their middle name. But for some reason, instead of naming the doll Eugene, he named it Robert. The doll is described as follows, and you'll see another photo now to appreciate its size. It's not that small. I've seen pictures of this doll before, but this particular photograph shows its true scale. It's actually much larger than you might think from the images. It's one of those cases where you expect to see something significantly smaller, and then when you see it in reality, you realize, my God, This doll is way bigger than I imagined. It briefly reminded me of when I once saw the statue dedicated to the Battle of Iwo Jima in Washington, D.C. The photos do it no justice. It's gigantic. We see a similar example here. In any case, the doll was clearly modeled after a naval officer or a cabin boy. Its most distinctive feature is the white clothing it originally wore. Someone might correct me, but this seems to be its original outfit, including a very noticeable hat. Many believe the doll has real human hair, but that's not the case. It's a synthetic material, resembling wool. A significant portion of the hair has fallen out over the last few decades, but that's the material it's made from. The rest of the doll is made of typical doll materials, perhaps fabric, plastic, and the like. So, the doll was given to the boy. And shortly thereafter, strange things began to happen in his life, and he allegedly even told his family about them. He said the doll was coming to life. It was doing things that no doll should be able to do. And in fact, its actions reminded me of the story of the Annabelle doll, which occurred several decades later. Those of you who have seen the movie Annabelle and the last film where it was featured, The Conjuring, will know what I'm talking about. But this particular doll, Robert, predated her by a good few decades. Here's what the boy reported. He claimed to hear the doll talking to Eugene. People passing by his room would allegedly hear voices inside, and they weren't coming from the boy, but from the doll. However, they were never able to find clear proof that the doll was speaking. I suppose if someone burst into the room, the voices would either stop or at least temporarily move elsewhere. Whatever the circumstances, no one could prove the sound was coming from the doll, but the suspicion was very strong. Furthermore, Robert the doll would apparently do things that got the boy into trouble. The boy would get into real trouble and try to explain to his parents, it was the doll did it. But of course, his parents didn't believe him and blamed everything on their son. In fact, all the bad behavior that was typically attributed to the boy, Eugene, was actually coming from Robert. And here are the truly creepy things the doll did. Neighbors reported that when the family was away, they, while going about their usual business, mowing the lawn or just relaxing on the porch, would notice Robert the doll moving from window to window in their house. Even though no one was home, even though the doll had no way of moving, they would see it moving from one window to the next. How creepy is that? The thought alone makes the hair on my arms stand up. Imagine what it would be like to witness such a sight. You're looking at your neighbor's house, and you see this sinister-looking doll calmly moving from one window to another. You probably realize it knows you're there, but it doesn't care, and that's chilling. Then, according to witnesses, the doll would also giggle when there were guests in the house. Perhaps it was the same neighbors or friends of the family, whoever it was. They would allegedly hear the doll giggle, and the way it laughed was enough to scare the living daylights out of those present. Additionally, the doll would apparently appear in different parts of rooms, and it got to the point where the family finally decided to lock it up. They wanted to put it in one place to be 100% sure the doll couldn't move. But what was that like? Imagine knowing for a fact that you left the doll in the bedroom only to find it in the kitchen. Or you left it in the living room and found it back in the bedroom. Other things people reported concerned Robert's ability to change his facial expression right before their eyes. So, this blank-faced doll you see in the photo could apparently change its expression, and not only that, but also blink its eyes. Can you imagine how terrifying that is? You're looking at this doll, and suddenly it tilts its head at you, or nods in agreement, or even blinks. Imagine seeing that. I don't know about others, but for me, That would be enough to cut off all contact forever. If I were a friend of the family, I'd say, either you come visit me, or that's it. That would be the last straw. As for the family, Eugene, the boy, grew up with the doll and kept it with him. He continued to live in the same house and kept it with him the entire time. Unfortunately, as a grown man, he passed away in 1974. The doll was left in the attic. But its story didn't end there, because a new family moved into the house. They had a 10-year-old daughter, and she was the one who found the doll in the attic. Perhaps it was one of those situations where the doll itself drew the girl to it, as if by some predestination, because without anyone's attention, it probably couldn't remain the living entity it is. So the curse continued, but now it had passed to a new owner, the 10-year-old girl, and she also reported several incidents. However, this time they seemed to be much worse than what Eugene had faced. Here's what she reported. This girl's name, by the way, is unknown. Apparently, she chose to remain completely anonymous. But here are her words. She claimed that at night, the doll would torment her, and not only that, but it would move from room to room. And one night, it even tried to attack her directly. The doll was right there, probably on top of her, attacking her. That's enough. At that moment, all you can do is run for your life and never look back if you see a doll like that attacking you. And even now, this girl is still alive. She's a grown woman now, possibly elderly. And to this day, whenever someone manages to find her and interview her, she maintains that the doll was alive and wanted to kill her. Eventually, in 1994, the doll was donated to a museum, and it remains in that museum to this day. And you're now seeing a photograph of that museum. The museum, it must be said, proudly displays it. They use Robert the doll. It's become almost a national landmark. It has made the museum famous. It's displayed there, as you can see, behind glass. And so, anyone who comes can see it. People take pictures of it. It would seem that's the end of it. But apparently, the stories associated with Robert the doll don't stop there. The staff at this museum, which, by the way, is called the East Martello Museum, tell stories related to Robert the doll. They say that Robert sometimes turns off the lights, even if they are left on in the museum. At other times, he turns the lights on when they should be off. The staff also claim that the position they leave him sitting in within the display case is different the next morning when they arrive. And on top of all that, they find dust on his shoes, as if, and this is so creepy, he had been crawling around on the floor, say, in different parts of the museum, as if he literally got out of the glass case and explored the museum. And the next morning, he just went back, not caring that he had dust and dirt on him from his previous outing. And they would find him like that. Pretty frightening stuff. Visitors to the museum, by the way, are instructed on the proper etiquette for interacting with and photographing Robert the doll. Apparently, he is quite nice to people who come to visit him, as long as they are nice to him. The rule seems to be that if you're going to take a picture of him, a physical photograph, then if you ask him politely, he won't do anything bad to you. If you don't, if you just take his picture without permission, then he will allegedly curse you. I tried to find out if there are any stories related to this curse, but I couldn't find anything. However, that's the urban legend in this part. If you don't ask him politely, he will curse you, and that curse will follow you. Also, if you ask him politely enough, he will tilt his head at you, indicating that yes, whatever you were asking for, he grants you permission. And the same apparently applies not just to photos, but to any request you make of him. As long as you ask politely, he won't mind. Truly creepy stuff. Another interesting fact on this topic: every October, during the Halloween season, which should be right about now, he is moved to a place called the Old Post Office and Custom House, a photo of which you're seeing now, and a whole production is made around his move. The photograph shows that everyone makes a maximum effort to ensure Robert the doll is taken care of. In other words, he isn't just shoved into some compartment, stuck in a box, and carried over. No, he is treated with respect, and it seems with caution, because of the stories associated with him. At least, that's the impression one gets from looking at this photograph. Thus, the people who move him know that when it comes to Robert the doll, if you treat him well, he won't do you any harm. So, what do you think? Robert the doll is one of the scariest urban legends. For me, it's scary because of the very idea of a living, possessed doll that can haunt you, especially one that looks like this. It's genuinely frightening. I mentioned earlier the works inspired by Robert the doll. Well, you don't have to look far for an example. Just think of Chucky. That character was created based on the story of Robert the doll, and the story of Annabelle, in turn, is also based on real events. However, the films dedicated to her, while based on the tragic experiences of the real people involved, also draw certain elements from the legend of Robert the doll and the sinister events associated with him. Truly unsettling material. That's all for now. As always, thank you, every one of you. Take care. Until next time.